Welcome to More Than a Muse podcast, a podcast all about women and the arts, hosted by Stauney and Sadie.
Join us as we explore what it's like being a female artist, examine modern-day problems, and educate ourselves and you on important and forgotten female artists of the past. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to More Than a Muse. I'm Stauney.
And I'm Sadie. We're back with another but unsung woman artist that I have found for everyone today. And I'm excited to talk about her.
I'm excited to hear about it. I love these ones. I'm like, let me just sit and listen to this beautiful story.
I have this ongoing note on my phone that like every time I hear a woman's name or like I'm reading an article or anything out, I just keep it for safekeeping. And for this month, I couldn't figure out who to do, but I finally stumbled on Viola Smith is her name, who was an incredible woman drummer. It is going to be a little bit of a shorter episode. I feel like a lot of the research that I could find on her, it was like random little quotes. And it's the thing that we talk about a lot where it's like either you're reading all of the books and watching every interview and watching everything, or you just get a snapshot. So today we're providing the jumping off point, but there are like YouTube videos of her playing available, interviews, books about like offshoots of all of this. So I would definitely go check her out because learning about her kind of like opened up a whole world of like other potential women artists to learn more about, which is always fun. It's like you uncover one thing and learn about one woman artist, boom, it opens up a portal to so many more. And that's what's so exciting.
I think that's my favorite thing, honestly, about this podcast. And I've probably said it a million times, but going from like little college Stauney who is flabbergasted to learn about Artemisia Gentowski to now like how many years? 4 years later, and it's, oh my gosh, that was just the beginning. There are so many women in the arts that we have not heard about. So
totally. And also too, so many iconic ones that we still have yet to cover. Wait, they're all iconic. Some people are just already more wildly known already. But any media that you've been consuming lately that you like?
Nope.
Amazing. That's okay.
It's been slow over here for me. I don't know. We're just gearing up for summer, and I just haven't really been doing anything different. Been watching a lot of old TV shows.
Yeah, me too. I've been rewatching Parks and Rec.
I was watching Grimm, which I've talked about before. It's like reimagined fairy tales. Love it so much. Apparently, they're about to do a movie. So, if you're looking for something to watch, maybe put that on your list.
That's all, though. I'm like, what is life lately? I don't know, but we're here. We're excited to be here.
We're here. We are excited. But instead of the present, which sounds very frightening, let's dive into the past.
Literally, let's dive into the past because we're currently... Obviously, we're using a lot of escapism in our life, so we will absolutely jump into the past. Okay, well, today I'm talking about, like I said, Viola Clara Smith, and she was born November 29th of 1912, and she was an American drummer who was best known for her work in orchestras, swing bands, and just popular music from the 1920s until 1975. She didn't stop drumming in 1975. I'll talk about it, but like she's drumming until like right before she dies. But she's one of the first kind of like big professional drummers. She played 5 times on the Ed Sullivan Show and in like movies, and also in the original Broadway cast of the musical Cabaret, which is pretty iconic. Yeah, Broadway musical. So for some background on her life, she was born in Mount Calvary, Wisconsin on November 29th of 1912, like I mentioned. She grew up there with 7 sisters and 2 brothers. So a huge family, and they all learned piano first. But what's cool is that the girls in the family were all in this all-girl orchestra that was created by her father. And she chose to be the drummer because all of the other instruments that she liked were already played by her older siblings, because she was the 6th child. So her parents actually operated a concert hall and a tavern in a city nearby where they lived. It was in the city called Fond du Lac Street, or Fond du Lac.
Fun.
I know. It became like the Smith Sisters Orchestra that featured trumpet, trombone, and orchestra. And when she was 13 is when she joined the band. Quote, he had these 8 girls all playing piano, and then he'd put them on different instruments. And I was so lucky to be the 6th one. And as the 6th one, I was the drummer. So I think she just picked it because it's what they were missing, and they needed a principal main instrument.
Love that. I know this is a little off, but it's so funny how some of the artists we cover, it's like, no, this was my passion. Like, I always loved it. And then other people like just fell into it. And then
yeah, totally.
It became my lifelong career.
All the instruments were taken, so I figured, why not drums? Totally. A quote from her is, "We practiced a lot. We had time to play and have fun, but after school, it was 2 hours of practice every day, even during school vacations. We traveled with the family orchestra, and as the older ones married, dropped out, or went back to school, only 2 of us were left." Go into how that happened. So, like I said, in the 1920s and then through the 1930s, she played in the Smith Sisters Family Orchestra. Okay, a note. I think that they changed their name because it was the Schmitz Sister Family Orchestra, but then they changed it to Smith. And I imagine they did that for, I don't know, a lot of different reasons, but it wasn't Schmidt. It became Smith. Irene played the trombone, Irma the vibraphone, Edwina on trumpet, Viola on drums, of course, Lily was on the saxophone, Mildred on bass violin, and Loretta was on the piano with Sally on the bass saxophone. So the full orchestra here.
Man.
And I know. They toured and did a lot of vaudeville and movie theaters on weekends and summer vacation while some of the sisters were still in school. According to her nephew, Dennis Bartash, playing with her sisters on the Major Bowles Amateur Hour radio show in the 1930s was their big break. And then in 1938, Viola and Mildred started the Coquettes. That was an all-female orchestra, which existed until 1942. Played the clarinet and the saxophone, where, of course, I said that weird, saxophone, played the clarinet and saxophone, but then of course Viola was just the main drummer.
Yeah.
This is something really interesting. So in 1942, of course, there were a lot of men that were leaving the country because they were enlisting to go fight in World War II. And so because of that, a lot of men were leaving the jazz bands that they were playing in, which left a lot of vacant seats. And Viola saw this and noticed it and actually penned an article for a magazine called Downbeat Magazine that was titled "Give Girl Musicians a Break," in which she argued that women musicians could play just as well as men. So here's some quotes from it. She says, "In these times of national emergency, when many of the star instrumentalists of the big name bands are being drafted, why not let some of the girl musicians of the country take their place? Today, I think, marks the most opportune time we girl musicians have ever had to take our rightful places in the big dance bands and do our bit to keep up the morale of the country by keeping the country's music alive. There's nothing wrong with the idea. Girls work right alongside men in the factories, in the offices, in nearly every trade or profession you can name, so why not in dance bands?" She continues, "The girls today are not the helpless creatures of earlier generations." Which, asterisk, they were never the hopeless creatures.
Were.
But I see where you're
just how they've been portrayed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to continue, some girl musicians are as much masters of their instruments as are male musicians. They can improvise their solos as well defined and thought-provoking and show unlimited imagination. She concluded this with saying, "Now is the time for all girl musicians to seek to be recognized. All the prominent band leaders are worrying themselves sick as sideman after sideman is called into the army with no replacements for them in sight. And yet, I think they are overlooking a very fertile field in the girl musicians that are available. And two, just think of all the showmanship that the presence of a member of the fair sex in a band would provide." And then she ended it saying, "Think it over, boys," and delivered this article out, all arguing for letting the girls play. And I just think that's so cool.
Yeah.
That back in the 40s, she was like, no, don't fill it with mediocre musicians. Look at the women, because the women actually can play, and you guys are all wrong if you think that we can't do that. And I thought that was pretty cool.
No, that's awesome.
Other quotes about this when I think like an article asked her at a later time, "Oh, how did people feel about?" And she said, "Oh, the girl musicians were so happy about it because I mentioned so many girls' names, all the girls I knew. Good musicians." So I couldn't find like the full transcript of what that article was, but I think it's really cool that apparently she was like shouting out all the women that she knew that could be good in that, and that they were all like, "Hey, that's me. Thank you for the shout out." I just think that's really cool.
Yeah. That's awesome, honestly, because then, because it's going like a step further than being like, somewhere out there's these women that are like masters of their craft and you should go and find them. She literally said, here is a list
and
of
here are
women
the
I know
ones that you could hire that I think could rise to the occasion here.
She's like, it takes it from an abstract idea to like a legitimate recommendation. So
Absolutely.
that's really cool.
Other things that she said about being a woman musician at the time, quote, girl musicians used to have trouble getting any work at all. You had to prove yourself. You had to be heard, but how could you be heard if nobody gives you a chance to be heard? This was the situation for years and years. I always had a job like the Coquettes, which was an offshoot of the family orchestra. We had some very important dates for the band in big theaters around the country, but this all happened naturally because I came from the family orchestra. The work was just laid out for me. I didn't fight for it, but all the girl musicians outside of that had a problem, a real problem, which I think is another really cool thing about her, where we talk about Nepo babies every now and then, and no one's mad about a Nepo baby if they admit it and are extremely talented. No one gets mad about that. And I think it's really cool that she acknowledged the fact of, yeah, my family did this, and so it came a little bit more naturally for me. And so I was lucky that I was able to work, but now I can look at all the other women around me and realize that if they weren't born into a family of musicians with a dad who owned a concert hall who like made it his goal, that this is going to be a little bit difficult. And I just think it's really cool that she was always advocating for the other women around her and wanting them to have these opportunities.
Yeah, that's amazing though. I wonder what like inspired her dad. Like he just kept having daughters, right? And so he was like, let's do an all-girl orchestra. Yeah. Like, let's do I don't know. That's really cool though.
In 1942, after Mildred got married, which is her older sister that she had this like Coquettes group with, she actually moved to New York and was given a handmade snare from one of her teachers named Billy Gladstone, and she received a summer orchestra to Juilliard and joined Phil Spitalny's, I think is how you say that, Hour of Charm Orchestra, which was a commercially successful all-girl orchestra. Something that she said about that instructor who gave her a drum, quote, Billy was the best drummer in America. He saw me play somewhere and asked me to come backstage. He showed me a special snare drum he had made and told me he was going to make me one, and I was just flabbergasted. So thought that was really sweet. I wanted to pin and talk about this Hour of Charm orchestra because when I saw that there was another all-female orchestra, I was very curious. This was an orchestra that was a musical group led by this man named Phil Spitalny that was popular in the 30s and the 40s, and it was an all-female orchestra in, of course, an era where a lot of orchestra members were male. And it was also known as Phil Spitalny's all-girl orchestra. And it was inspired because he went to a concert in 1932 that featured, quote, an electrifying performance by a brilliant female violinist. And so when he saw this, he disbanded a male orchestra that he directed, and then he began a whole tour of the United States seeking female musicians for a new orchestra. His expenditure of $40,000 and auditions of 1,500 women produced a 32-member orchestra that debuted at the Capitol Theater in New York in 1934. The musicians usually ranged in age from 17 to 30 and were also like mostly single. That was kind of like a point. There was a newspaper article about him that was published in 1958 noted, quote, ridicule from all sides in show business and sour comments from his musician brothers that he was crazy as he created the first all-girl band of any consequence ever organized.
Oh my gosh. How radical.
How radical. How dare he? He's leaving the boys out. These boys don't have any opportunities, obviously.
Oh my goodness. What are they going to do?
Yeah, exactly. The orchestra's specialty was music familiar to its audience. There was an article in 1945 where he described the group style as between symphonic and popular. Arrangements were done by 3 members of the orchestra that usually featured piano, harp, and strings more than saxophones or trombones. There's actually a book that now I'm like really wanting to dive into by this woman named Sherry Tucker called Swing Shift, All Girl Bands of the 1940s, which is so intriguing to me because I'm like, this is a thing. This is like a genre of the all-girl bands of the 1940s. But I guess it would make sense because it's World War II and all of the men are gone. And so almost like the call back to the letter. Where she was like, hey, all the men are gone, but we should still have music. We should still continue morale. And don't worry, there are plenty of women plenty of women musicians out there. And so it's just like one of those things I've never thought of that I was like, wow, yeah. Why not
Or
then?
like,
and so I guess that was a big thing in the 40s.
or like A League of Their Own, where they had the
Mm-hmm.
all-female baseball teams and everything. I'm sure
Yeah.
that there's probably a lot of things we haven't thought about that were
Mm-hmm.
suddenly replaced with all-female groups.
Totally.
Yes, it's interesting.
I know it made me like wanting to dive into that more. Like, what other industries
I
suddenly
know,
had a
right?
huge gaping hole that all these women were able to be
Yeah.
like, oh, perfect. Now I finally get my chance. I don't know.
Lately, I like every time I hear about that, then it just makes me so mad that we went back to the 50s and the 60s
I
after.
know.
Oh,
I
anyway,
agree.
different topic for another day.
Different topic. But I hear what you're saying. And I
Yeah.
totally agree. But from that book, quote, the orchestra's trademark effects of quivering strings, dramatic brass fanfares, galloping rhythms, and sweeping flurries from the harp. So sounds very beautiful. This group apparently really stressed like decorum and class in group's performance. In contrast, apparently there was another group called Ina Ray Hutton's Melodiers that had a very like blatant sex appeal. That was like another all-female orchestra. So I guess this is how he was like, we're the classy one, they're the sexy ones. I don't know.
Wow.
He required the musicians to dress in formal evening gowns. These dresses were usually white and they were uniform in design. What's crazy is the purchase of one lot of dresses in the mid 1940s cost $18,000. So he was spending
Man.
a lot of money to make sure that these women were all dressed uniformly in these very formal gowns. Like he put $18,000
Gosh.
into that, which is
That's a
crazy.
lot of money. I'm sure that's some war inflation right there, but
Totally.
goodness, that's a lot. Even nowadays, I'm like, oof.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm thinking. Like $18,000 in
Yeah.
the 40s? That's crazy.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Another thing is that nearly all of the musicians were single, and their contracts actually required them to give 6 months' notice if they planned to marry. And I think it's just the typical thing where it's just that I feel like we talked about this last week, where with the Disney animators, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they didn't want to hire women because it seemed like they would just get married and then leave the job field completely. And so I wonder if that's what was happening here, where it was like, we don't want you to be married because as soon as you get married, you're going to leave anyways. And so you just have to give us notice. And I feel like it's really interesting to see the proof of that 2 weeks in a row of
Yeah.
marriage being like a closing of the chapter for a woman's personal ventures in history. And I'm just really grateful that has changed a little bit since then,
I agree. Definitely.
where you
Yeah.
can continue even if
Mm-hmm.
you have a ring on your finger. So
Yeah.
thought that was interesting.
Man, very interesting.
Most of these women were graduates from music conservatories. Versatility was a key element to these orchestras. Some members sang solos, and all of them formed a vocal chorus at times, and each was proficient at least in 2 instruments. There was another woman that was added to my notes app list today, Jan Baker, who could play 12 instruments and did so in this orchestra. A quick note about the Melodiers, because again, apparently all 19, like this is a thing in the 1940s, the all-female orchestras. This was an American all-female band, and the band was led by a singer named Ina Ray Hutton, and that this featured several musicians during its existence. Formed in 1934, actually, originally as a 15-member band, was disbanded in 1939, who soon afterwards created an all-male orchestra, which is interesting. But what's cool is they were the first female band to be recorded initially by Vocalion Records in 1934 and later Victor. A cool little note in history.
Yeah.
Anyways, so back to Viola here. So she would play with the NBC Symphony Orchestra. Her signature style of 13 drums, particularly she would have two 16-inch tom-toms at shoulder height. It was never copied. However, Smith noted that Louis Belson using two bass drums after meeting and observing her with the tom-toms. So it seems like a man stole her signature thing. But I love that she was like, yeah, he saw me do that. And then he stole it.
Yeah.
During this time, though, she recorded music for films like When Johnny Comes Marching Home and Here Comes the Coeds. As a member of the National Symphony Orchestra, she even performed with Ella Fitzgerald and Chick Webb, and she gained notoriety as, quote, the fastest girl drummer, and she started saying Gene Krupa is the male Viola Smith, which I think's cool because she's like, nope, I'm not the female version of him. He is the male version of me, which is exactly what we like.
Yes.
She also performed at President Harry Truman's inauguration in 1949.
Oh, how cool.
I know. A quote about that is that, quote, they had Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, and Phil Spitalny. Quote, we had a revolving stage in this huge auditorium. We could see Truman and his wife sitting in the first row of the balcony. It was quite an exciting evening, which I can, of course, only imagine.
Yeah, I'm like, it sounds like a great lineup.
I know. She remained in this Hour of Charm orchestra until 1954, that all-female thing. And that, after Hour of Charm disbanded, she actually led her own band, which was just called Viola and her 17 drums, which I would love to see a showing of Viola and her 17 drums. And then from 1966 to 1970, she played with the Kit Kat Band and was also, like I mentioned, a part of the original 1960s Broadway production of Cabaret, which is amazing.
That is so cool.
Some other quotes just from her. She said, we girls have as much stamina as men. This is something that she said in 2017, quote, girl drummers can stand the grind of long tours and exciting one-night stands, which, amazing girl. Yes. They got the stamina. In the year 2000, she was honored as a jazz legend by the Lincoln Center for the Arts. And that same year, she was also featured in a New York Times article called When Women Called the Tunes, rediscovering the players who kept things swinging after the men went to war, which is, again, I'm like, this is like so many interesting things to look into here. And that same year, she was one of the 8 musicians who was honored in that tribute to women in jazz in the year 2000, which is really cool. Ooh, I love this quote too. Viola was also breaking other gender barriers, appearing as an endorser for WFL drums and cymbals. The copy in a 1950 print ad read, featured with Phil Spitalny's famous Hour of Charm, all-girl orchestra, Viola and her striking blue-fash WFL drums win enthusiastic praise from coast to coast. When spotlighted for a solo, the superb technique and brilliant showmanship she displays on her handsome WFLs are breathtaking. Mr. Spitalny and Miss Smith both insist upon eye appeal as well as ear appeal, which I just
sell those drums.
Sell those drums. Yeah, amazing. She never married, but apparently she had been engaged to be married, but that man was drafted into World War II and that engagement was canceled. I don't really know details on that. I don't know if she just chose to step away from that engagement. I'm not sure if something happened to him. But, okay, what's amazing? So at the time of her, ready for this? 107th birthday in November of 2019, it was reported that she occasionally still drummed with bands in Costa Mesa, California, as one of the oldest living mainstream musicians. She lived to be 107 years old.
Oh my gosh. I was going to say, I found it shocking she was still alive in the 2000s. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that's possible. And then you're like, 2019. I'm like, wait, what?
Wait, what? No, exactly.
And that's a long time.
It's an interesting note of I guess, having a man in your life ages you, because this woman lived to be 107 years old. And like in the note of her personal life, maybe she had men in her life. I don't know. It doesn't seem like she had a lot of like long-term relationships here. It seems like she was just drumming and living her life. Sure
I think they've proven it that like scientifically having children and being married lessens your lifespan for women. For men, it actually lengthens it, but
which is so much that we could talk about.
Yeah, I'm like, it sounds like something's probably wrong with the relationship then. But
yeah, I'm not sure. Another cute thing is there's a children's book that's called The Fastest. Wait, let me make sure I get the right thing. Oh, yeah. The Fastest Drummer, Clap Your Hands for Viola Smith. It's by Dean Robinson and illustrated by Susanna Chapman. And it's actually was just published last year in March of 2024. And it's an adorable children's book about this drummer, Viola Smith, which I think is really sweet. Just some quotes that I want to read about her, just other people talking about her work, and then also like the legacy that she was able to leave on other female musicians. The renowned solo percussionist named Dame Evelyn Glennie learned the news of Smith's passing through the New York Times and the BBC. Quote, immediately I started to delve into Viola's life and work, and I simply could not believe how ignorant I was of her remarkable career, innovation, and sheer tenacity. How had I gone through my career without knowing this remarkable woman?
How many times have we said that?
Exactly. Gary Kivistad credited Smith as, quote, a respected and successful advocate for female musicians. Her argument that women musicians could play just as well as men was decades ahead of the women's movement of the 60s and 70s. Dr. Annie Stevens, who's an associate professor of percussion at Virginia Tech and a member of the marimba duo Escape 10, agreed that Viola, quote, should be recognized by her relentless pursuit to encourage a place for female musicians in a male-dominated musical arena. Beyond her seat behind the drums, she used her voice to support women filling in on the bandstand as men were being sent off to war in the early 1940s, which I, of course, mentioned.
Yes.
Dr. Kay Stonefelt, who is a director of percussion studies at SUNY Fredonia, remembers watching this big band and the Kit Kat band on the Ed Sullivan Show. Quote, at the time, I was becoming immersed in my public school music program. If not for the visual prominence of Viola Smith on national TV, I cannot say where I might have wound up in the world of percussion or music business. Seeing her on national TV also brought my parents on board in support of my enthusiasm for drumming. Watching then and now, one can hear a level of musicianship in her solos that are clearly developed and strongly supported by an amazing technical facility, a warmth, a joy, and an integrity that is so often lacking in our modern day soloing. And I just think that is such a beautiful reminder, just for, like, we've talked about so many times, like the importance of representation, where she was like, because I was able to see her do it, it was like, oh, cool. Like, this is inspiring for me, but also it made my parents realize, oh, this is a legitimate thing that she can go and pursue, and it's like possible for her too. And I think that's just so amazing.
Yeah, I agree. It really is like that ironic, like seeing is believing kind of situation where it's like, in order to do something that seems so unobtainable and terrifying, like you do have to watch somebody else do it.
And like you have to like learn that it exists. You know what I mean? I think of just like when I was a kid and learned that, oh, wait, there's such thing as professional songwriters, and learning that like opened up my world, and then, you know, eventually led me to go down all the rabbit holes I did about just like learning about songwriting and about the music industry and everything. Cause it was like, what? This is real? People do this?
A job?
Yeah, because like I didn't have any kid. I'm from a small town in Utah. No one was really into that. But seeing all that, I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah. No, it's incredible what that does.
The last one that I want to read is Annie Stevens recognized Viola's signature drum set. Quote, this kind of innovation, in addition to her musical genius behind the drums, is what made an outstanding and long-lasting impact on our art form. It isn't just the fact that she was holding her own as a female musician, but that she was pushing the envelope and introducing the percussive arts to new ideas. Stonefelt summed up Smith's amazing talents. Quote, Viola said that she led a charmed life. Every interview or performance seems to exhibit that joie de vivre, which is joy of life, I believe. Anyways, so it's hard sometimes because this is obviously a shorter episode. Like that's pretty much what I have on her. But when I started like learning about her, it just felt like it felt so joyful. Like reading her story, it was so nice to be like, oh, this is just a success story of a woman who paved the way in her own career from day one. No, I'm going to be a drummer. And she lived a long, healthy life as a musician, doing exactly what she wanted to do. And in that time too, was able to advocate for other female musicians and pave the way even beyond that, and help inspire musicians that she didn't know personally. And I was like, I have to talk about her anyways, because it's just so incredible, the stories that are out there, and the women who, like I said, were arguing on behalf of women musicians before, for almost 100 years ago, and like the butterfly effect of now where we are today, where of course there's always going to be work to do in like these male dominated film fields, but she was one of those dominoes, helped argue on behalf of women musicians. And it's just so cool to read about that and be like, wow, thanks Viola, thanks for your work.
I love when it's just a happy story.
I
And she lived
know.
happily ever after doing art until the day she died. The end.
Literally years old taking drumming gigs.
Yeah.
That's
Like,
incredible.
that's just so nice. Because, yeah,
She
just
lived to be almost 108.
yeah, that's crazy.
And like,
Oh, gosh.
her being involved in cabaret, like the original orchestra,
Yeah.
just
So
a
incredible.
casual footnote in her story, and also opened up this whole world of apparently these all-female all-female orchestras. And I feel like a future episode I'm so intrigued on is the New York Times article about all the women that paved the way for
Yeah.
women musicians when all of the men went to war. Like, that's crazy to even think
Yes.
about.
I know it's definitely opened, I think, a little bit of inspiration there where we can start looking a little bit more on all these places where women were able to swoop in and save the day.
Yep.
While the men went off to war. Yeah.
I know. Obviously, and they were saving the day too. Legit
Yeah,
women,
I know.
But
I meant just, yeah.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But anyways, cool. Like I said, a quick episode today, but still wanted to shout her out. So thanks for listening and being here. And of course, I'm wearing our Hysterical Society merch today.
Yes.
It's still available if you want to go check out what we have open. And we'll be back next Monday, as per always.
Also, another little plug, we do have a monthly newsletter that comes out every month. And so if you want to subscribe to that, you can find us on Substack. So also check that out. And then, yeah, just don't forget about our merch. If you go buy it, there's still time.
Go get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not going to have it go anywhere. So,
yeah. Cool. And thank you.
You're welcome. And we'll see you back next Monday.
Bye.
Bye.